goal of it is so that when people are practicing, they know what to think about, and not just doing things because a teacher said to do it and it was a tradition, but that they really know the reasons behind it. And the other goal behind this is I want people to feel like they got to know something personal about each of the teachers, because each of these men on the panel actually studied a significant amount of time with these well-known teachers, and they'll have things to say that you could normally get just out of a method book. So that's my goal. Then with the questions, what I'd like you to do is, as you hear the different things that I'll ask, I want you to be thinking about how you could ask some questions and word them in a way that would be concise and clear, so that we're able to move through a lot of different questions efficiently. So without any delay, I was going to introduce each of the different people, but have them say a little bit about themselves, and then also about the amount of time that they studied with their appropriate teacher, and what makes their teacher significant and unique from maybe the other points of view that are here. So starting off, I'd like to introduce James Stokes from Appalachian State University. You can tell us a little bit about yourself.
I studied with Mr. Adam from 1981. That is, I was at 18 years old until 1987. So my experience with him was as an undergraduate student, and I was his graduate assistant the last year before I couldn't stand being in Bloomington any longer, and I moved to New York City. And I continued to study with him on and off when I was away. And then in Columbus, Ohio, I was there for 20 years after New York. And at that point, I started teaching at Capital University, where I would take my students back to Bloomington, and I would have Mr. Adam teach my students, and I would observe the teaching. So those were probably the most valuable moments, hours of my teaching career and professional career, to see what he was doing and how he was thinking through things, and some of the interactions we had. He wouldn't talk to the students most of the time. He would speak to me privately about how to handle the students, you know. So very valuable experience. You want to know, do you want to just have us introduce that?
Yeah, introduce yourself like that first. Okay. That'll be good. And then, so now I'll have Bob O'Donnell.
Well, I was born and raised in Los Angeles. I studied with a number of teachers growing up. I actually went to Claude my junior year of college. I'd already studied with Tommy Stevens and Irving Bush, Ollie Mitchell, and I went to Claude to kind of, because he had the gift to solidify accuracy, range, and endurance, and that's one thing that was hard to dial in. So that's what I found unique with Claude, that he seemed to come up with the answers and have the right format and game plan to putting that together, and to where it built confidence to come up with anything that you walked in the studio to have to do. That's what else did you want?
That's it for now.
Yeah, so that's pretty much the bottom line.
And the next person is Rich Willey.
Yeah, I went to see Dr. Donald S. Reinhardt in 1978. I was 23 years old and basically fallen apart. I had kind of fumbled around. I figured if you played a lot that your chops would get better, and it wasn't working like that. It was, I was playing a lot. I was playing like 5 and 6 hours a night on, gigs in a disco band, and basically falling apart. So I went to see Doc Reinhardt, and I started with him in 78, and let's see, in 81 I moved to Philadelphia because I had an injury problem, and I don't want to go into that because I was so stupid, and that's funny, by the way. Yeah, you can laugh at me being stupid. Thank you, all right. And Shannon knows. And so I moved up there, and we became friends. I was over at his studio a lot. He stopped by my place a lot, and he let me do 3 of his teachers clinics, his 3-day teacher clinics, gratis. I had taken a day job. I had to switch to valve trombone and bass trumpet, but I did typesetting for him, and because that was my day gig, and he had all these materials that he wanted reduced to smaller sizes, so he was thrilled that I was able to do that. You know, he had a 6-page handout, I could make it 2 pages, so he started giving me lessons gratis, and I moved away from there in, I don't know, 85, I think, and I went back for some lessons, and then he died, I guess, in 88, I think, but yeah, I love that guy, man. He was the first guy that ever steered me. He never told me anything that didn't work, so, you know, basically I owe my entire career, and I finally came back to trumpet in 95, and I know that he knew back then that I would one day come back to trumpet, so it's, you know, now I can play trumpet and trombone. It's really cool. So, you know, I thought it was a horrible thing at first, and it worked out. Wow, couldn't happen any better. So that's enough out of me.
Cool. Now the next person is Roy Poper, who's joining us. He's the trumpet professor at Oberlin, and I knew him when he was trumpet professor at Cal State University Northridge, and you're actually on vacation in New York right now, correct?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
Wait, I'm losing your audio. Hold on.
Okay.
There, now your audio's back. Now you can tell us a little bit about yourself and about Jimmy Stamp and et cetera.
Okay, I was born and raised in Los Angeles, born in LA and raised in actually Long Beach, California. And I found Mr. Stamp when I was 15 years old. And had, I guess, about 18 years with him off and on as my teacher. Like a lot of people that went to see him, I had consistency problems. And I think his greatest gifts were helping players to achieve consistency, stay in the center of the sound. He was a very patient teacher, and like others have said, he never told me anything that didn't work, so I would stand on my head and spit nickels if that's what he said to do. So that was my experience with Mr. Stamp.
Cool. So what I wanted to do now is go through and maybe share a personal story about each of the teachers that would kind of be something that you might not necessarily hear in a book or anything like that, and that kind of maybe shares a little bit about him as a person and character and things that he might do in teaching. So is there anything like that that comes off the top of your head about your lessons with Jimmy Stamp?
A lot of things, but one thing that comes to mind, and I can't remember the exact thing, but it seemed like sometimes he was almost like a healer. I mean, you'd be standing there maybe playing and not doing so well, and he'd like walk over to you, maybe touch your chin and center your body, just so all of a sudden you'd be playing easily and effortlessly, and sound would get better. And one time I said, "How did you ever know to do that? You know, to get me in that position to play like that?" He said, "Oh, I go up a lot of blind alleys at home." And went on to explain that before he ever would try anything with a student, he was 95% sure it would work for everybody. So he was a very gifted teacher.
Cool. Now we have Jim Stokes answer the same question.
I was listening to Roy talk, and I'm sure you're going to hear this a lot. You know, just the fact that these guys could touch you or say something to you and affect you in dramatic ways. I think you're going to hear that out of all of us. And that's where the connection, I think, is most powerful for the teachers that way speaks mountains for the kind of education that we got. And I, for one, feel very fortunate to have been able to spend this kind of time with these people. And on top of that, I'm sorry, I'm going on a different direction, but
No, it's okay.
the fact is, for me to be able to sit on a panel and to listen to you guys talk about, this is a real education for me too. I feel it. So I'm hopeful that I'm walking away from this learning something new. You know. So anyway, Mr. Adam, and I'll preface to say that I kind of feel like it needs to be said that I'm not going to be able to express Mr. Adams' words. However, I'm going to give you the impression of what he has given me and through my learning, you're going to hear things of which I've been influenced by many other people, but I can definitely tell you that the essence of it is what Mr. Adam had taught through me. And you're probably going to hear it through all of us, but it's very difficult for me to say that's Mr. Adam. You know, the experience that any of us, or at least for us, I've had this conversation many times with other Adam students, and they'd say, "He told you that?" Or no, he would never say that. And I said, well, that's what he told me, which he had to adjust his way of teaching for each one of us. Okay? So anyway, there's this dissertation, I thought I'd get fancy with you guys today, that Mark Wilcox wrote. It compares 4 students of Mr. Adam. I'm one of them. And then it takes us and kind of shows our experience, which might be good reading if you're more curious about Mr. Adam's teaching. You might understand things a little bit more clearly. Is my mic not working? Oh, it's mine. I'm too short. That's why I can't. So it might give you a better idea of kind of the experience, a varied experience that you can understand more. So anyway, in this dissertation, you asked us to make a statement about, the teaching.
Yeah.
So Mark writes this, and I don't think it can be put any better way. That Adam uses a holistic teaching style. A course of study with Adam involves more than just trumpet playing. Through supplementary reading and personal encouragement, he positively affects the student's self-image. In a master class, Adam focuses as much or more on developing a strong collegial character as on trumpet performance. Additionally, Adam emphasizes concentration on the desired sound rather than the physical aspects of playing the trumpet. The primary method he uses is modeling the desired sound and instructing the student to copy his example. Now, he would say to me, Jimmy, he would say, I want you to listen to what I'm playing, but there's already one Bill Adam. I want you to be yourself. So he wasn't trying to get me to sound exactly like Bill Adam. He wanted me to find those elements within his playing and his sound that basically permeated the majority of the students that were studying with him, and the professional players that you may be familiar with that are out there these days. Okay?
I know a number of his students in LA.
Yeah.
So I'll let Bob kind of answer the same question. I know one thing, like when I took it from him, that was kind of unique, and I don't know if this ever happened for you, is like, I don't recall him Claude ever playing in a lesson. But
That's true.
you probably heard him more than I would have. I only heard him demonstrate a few times at a brass conference.
Well, as I mentioned earlier, he never wanted to play, but I finally convinced him to play a Vivaldi duet with me, or a 2-trumpet Vivaldi thing on one of the concerts that we were doing in Oregon. And he said he hadn't played in front of anybody in 10 years, so that was kind of an eye-opener for him, but he was a little nervous around the edges, but incoming?
Hold on. Yeah, hold on.
Sounds like a cricket.
Yeah, we're trying to fix that.
But I started with Claude, very respectful of him. He was always very well dressed, and as we evolved in our relationship, it became like a second father-son type vibe. And as I went out and was working in around the country, if I had issues, I could call him, and without blinking an eye, he would be able to fix it over the phone and know. And it's that kind of relationship that I knew I could count on him to keep me in the straight and narrow. Like I mentioned before in one of our earlier gatherings here, the fact that we were playing 4 to 6 hours a day doing these kind of ice show things, and the high range was disappearing. And I called Claude and said, I can't believe it. He said, back off, you're playing too loud. And it corrected itself in one tune. And I couldn't believe that it was that aware of what was going on. And he was a very positive vibe type person. There's no negativity whatsoever. And that really kind of helped to build confidence to know what was going on. So
I think we were talking before lunch that one of the things that I always thought was interesting is no matter how you felt, you come out of a lesson encouraged.
Well, he was always very positive in his teachings, and he covered a multitude of things to get you prepared for whatever was necessary, and that's the thing that I I really admired about the man. And he was a great hang.
Next, Rich Willey.
Well, let's see. I'll kind of go in reverse order. Reinhardt kept the trombone in his studio. He had been a trombone player like under Toscanini and Stokowski and all these guys. And one day he was going to demonstrate the core of the sound for me. And man, the thing was covered in dust. I could tell he hadn't played it in years. And he got this thing out. He says, "Yeah, I haven't played this in years." And he played high Fs on that thing. That I tell you what, man, it parted my hair. Of course, you can't tell now. But anyway, and then as far as his manner, he wasn't about going in and complimenting students. You know, I didn't go to play for him to impress. What is all that noise? Is that me?
I think we're,
Oh, it's an echo.
yeah.
It's like a good cell phone connection. All right. Anyway, no, he wasn't about, fanning our ego. He was about, finding the problems and helping us find solutions for them. And in fact, he did. If I'd gone in there and always sounded good, I might not have learned anything. So I'm glad that I always went in there and sucked. But as far as humorous anecdotes or personal stories, I moved to New York in, I think it was 85 or 86, and I got to know the Colon family, Charles Colon Publishing, and when they found out I was a typesetter, that's what I was doing to make money, and playing gigs for fun, it turned out. Well, they weren't all that fun, but anyway, they wanted me to do some typesetting for them, and they took this book that Doc Reinhardt had done, and now Charlie, the old man Colin, told me that when Doc Reinhardt came to him, he insisted that they print the typewritten pages, which was unheard of. They didn't print typewriter, they would typeset it. So this is about 300 pages. Well, this is 1973. I'm not sure what year this was, like 88 or something. This is the same book, 70 pages. I typeset it.
Wow.
So, Reinhardt was kind of funny. He wanted it to be a big, impressive book, you know what I mean? So, and it is impressive, but, it didn't have to be that big.
This is exactly the same book?
Exactly the same contents.
Wow. I
Yeah.
didn't know that.
This is typeset in Times Roman. It's like 10 on 11, 10 on 12.
That's great.
Yeah, by about 22 pica wide. See, I know all this typesetting stuff. Anyway, and as far as, the hang factor, there was a place down on the corner of 19th and Chestnut called Snow White, and it was a little hot dog stand. And we went down to Snow White. We're sitting there eating, and he says, 9 o'clock. And I'm thinking, what? He says, 9 o'clock. And I said, oh. And I look over here, it's like, whoa. And it's like, he was carrying on a conversation with me, and he was telling me, look over here, man. So he had an eye for the girls, man. He could spot, he could spot the magnificent ones. I will say that about him. I always respected him for that. And of course, I ended up marrying one, so there we go. All right, I'm done.
Okay, now the other thing I was gonna try to get into kind of two categories of questions, and when you guys are thinking about questions you want to ask, maybe think of something similar. As I was trying to think how I could compare these, they're musical types of questions and kind of physical technique sorts of things. So I was going to get into asking, like, for example, one of the things that Claude Gordon would and Adam and Reinhardt and Stamp might be completely different on is buzzing. Like, why buzz, why not buzz, why buzz the lead pipe and not the lead pipe, why buzz your lips, why not buzz your lips, what's the advantage of it, how are things usually done wrong. Like, for example, when I was taken from Claude, I didn't do buzzing, but I knew that Roy did buzzing and that he got good results with people doing buzzing, but then there were other people that did buzzing that didn't get so good a result. So I'll kind of start off with Roy, and maybe you can explain to us the advantage of it, how to do it, how not to do it, what are some of the things that people do wrong and kind of get wrong ideas about it, and then we can kind of go down the line and have the other people kind of address similar sort of thing.
Okay, well, I had an interesting conversation with Mr. Adam one time, and because I know he didn't care for it that much, and he had such good results else. I was just curious as to what he found objectionable about it. And what I got from him was basically that I think that he felt that it didn't relate well to just playing the trumpet, and that his approach with the pipe was a superior way. And I think it's excellent. And I by the way, Jimmy Stamp liked it too. So there's a lot more common ground, I think, than there is difference in these approaches. I think Mr. Stamp, if you want to put it on modern footing, Mr. Stamp was very much like Jim Thompson over at Eastman, who thinks that most of us are holding our lips in too high a state of tension, and that playing close intervals on the mouthpiece is a great way, and paying extremely good attention to pitch, matching pitch with a good keyboard is a great way for the lips to begin to give up their tension and blow as though there was no buzz at all. And when I kind of proffered that idea with Mr. Adam one time at a class that he was giving at UCLA, he said, that doesn't sound bad to me. I'm going to have to run that by Jacobs. And I found that it was interesting. He was open-minded about it, and I certainly enjoyed his point of view. And it works. They both work great, I think. Does that answer your question?
I think so. So, well, like how would, like if I were a complete beginner, never taken from you or anything, how would you explain to me to do buzzing?
I don't teach beginners anymore, but I haven't taught anybody less than 18 in years. But I think I would have them start the mouthpiece, put the mouthpiece up, and get them in a good playing position, and get them to move air from a position like that until they got like a little kid in the bathtub with a toy duck or a motorboat, something going like that. Just an easy, natural vibration.
Cool.
That's how it started.
Okay.
And I would take the intervals that Stamp used to use, the closed positions, and make more half steps than whole steps. The closest intervals possible.
Cool. Okay, now I have Jim Stokes.
Well, I thought the comparison that Roy just made is very appropriate. Mr. Adam I think what makes all these guys great at what they do is because they felt really strongly about what they did, and they really felt that the method and the way that they communicated with the students was the way that they could do it best. And I also know, just like Stamp and Roy, that we're always curious. Mr. Adam was always curious. I can't tell you, I said, Mr. Adam, how did you learn how to do that and convey that information? He said, well, I sat in a mirror for hours in front of the mirror and played and worked this out for different students in different ways. So when I hear the comment that you made, Roy, I can't tell you how many times I said, well, I started in I'm from Western North Carolina and studied with a trombone player, Key Garvin, and we played a little bit of Mouthpiece, and he showed me a few things to do that trombone players do, but the majority of the stuff that we did, Mouthpiece-wise, was in melodic context. We were playing tunes, and there was a lot of follow-through with it. So that's all I knew. Charlie Vernon was at Brevard. He had cut, Jacobs had cut the mouthpiece out, and you could buzz just the ring of the mouthpiece. I did that a little bit. So when I went to see Mr. Adam, he heard a certain amount of tension in my playing. I don't think it was really related to the mouthpiece at all, but he wanted me to spend a little bit more time blowing the pipe. And what I felt over 2 or 3 years was that it was more in the pipe itself, when we just played the lead pipe itself, which is just like the one that you'd have on your horn, sets up the balance, that we play trumpet-wise. We kind of focus out. Bob Malone talks about the focus of where the trumpet is, the B flat or the C trumpet is here when you go from one to the other. In any case, that was one way to set up the particular balance. That's why he did that. And when you blow the E flat, if you have a 37 Bach, the 25 pipe, and you play the E flat on the piano or the F on the trumpet, you're playing the pitch that Mr. Adam would try to get people to go after. And I can't tell you how many times I've had a beginner or a young player come in, and they're having a hard time making the right sound, and we'll blow the pipe for, 5 minutes, and just talk, and we'll blow it again, making sure they're playing that E flat. They put the mouthpiece on the trumpet, and immediately the right sound comes out of the horn. The quality is completely different, and I think that's really what he did. He says that's kind of going after the sound the way that you would when you're playing the trumpet. I think that's why he got away from the mouthpiece a little bit more, but he always told me, he said, if the mouthpiece works for you, you should play a little bit of it. And I usually did. It was mostly in context, melodic context. Is that what you want?
Yeah, great. Bob, answer next.
Well, in all my years studying with Claude, he never had me buzzing on mouthpiece. He said, you need to just focus on getting that out of your instrument. And when I had young students, and especially very young students that were just starting from the get-go, I would have them first create at least a sound on a mouthpiece. And I said, this is what's creating the sound, and the trumpet is your amplifier. So if I could get them to buzz maybe a C, Thirdspace C in the staff, and then put it in their horn and get close to the same buzz, then we're at least getting the focus to start. But as far as Claude studies and what, there was never an issue of just like maybe doing scales or arpeggios with just a mouthpiece. He felt that it was more critical to work on his whole systematic approach and dial it in that way. But when I have an early call in the studio or something, I carry a mouthpiece in my car, and I'll buzz arpeggios and maybe try and get even first and second routine of Claude's on the mouthpiece in before I hit the studio. That way at least I'm warmed up a little bit and have a fighting chance of coming up with it. So that's the difference. I mean, we all have a similar common denominator here that I think all of the 4 teachers that we're speaking about, are focused on bettering everyone's performance and whatnot. But it's just a different approach, and it's kind of unique to hear about these other guys, because I did not study with Jimmy Stamp or John Kleinman. I did study a little bit with Irving Bush and Tommy Stevens when I was in college, but everybody has just a little bit different concept. But when it all boils down to it, it comes down to the same bottom line. Yeah. So that's pretty much it.
Cool. Let's have Rich.
Yeah, Doc was most concerned about us being able to go out and play music and forget about all the stuff we do in the practice room. He wanted us to do the stuff in the practice room, any correctional procedures, until it became the way we played. And then, when we go out, he says, you forget about Reinhardt on the bandstand. You go out and just think about music. And I too, I'm really interested in hearing about, you guys' experience with these guys. I've known a few Adams students, and I've known a few Caruso guys. And where's the Caruso guy? Don't we have a Caruso guy?
No.
No? All right. Well, that's okay. But let's see, talking about buzzing. The buzzing embouchure for Reinhardt was kind of like the foundation of everything. Who here has perfect pitch? Is that close to a B flat?
Yes.
You have perfect pitch?
Sort of.
Is that a B flat?
It's really close.
Wow. Habit. So, corners down, chin flat. Well, anyway, so he wanted us to buzz without a mouthpiece. He said, you put the mouthpiece, you pin the lips against the teeth with the mouthpiece, you can get away with murder. He said, I want your lips and the muscles to be strong enough that they can produce a sound without anything. And he used to talk about the whole concept of relaxation. He said, if you relax and you're not strong to begin with, then you're going to collapse. He said you got to have strength to relax without collapsing. So doing that buzzing really builds up the strength that it takes to relax. I mean, I did a 5-hour gig last night, man. I tell you what, if I had been all relaxed on the first set, I would have never made it through the 5th hour. I had to be good and strong. It's like I don't know, who's a weightlifter? These guys are so strong that for them, carrying furniture is easy. Well, for me, it would kill me. All right. So playing the trumpet's the same way. I've got to be good and strong so that when I do relax and just make music, I've still got plenty of reserve. So and then he had drills where he would have you. Now he also had Reinhardt discovered the upstream and the downstream types of players. There are 2 distinct types of players. If you ever watch a guy play and he's like this, you ever seen a guy like that? Most of those guys are upstream players. He's a real low placement. They've got their head down so their horn's not, because they'd play like this if they had their head like you and me or whoever is downstream. And then you got the guys who play like this. Gaza was, Reinhardt called that a straight type 3. There's a guy in Florida. Do you guys know Tom Parmenter? Fantastic trumpet. Somebody know him? Fantastic trumpet. And he plays like he's straight, it's like a clarinet, And so you got all kinds of different players. Well, the downstream players can do this. I don't want to point to this. They can do a thing where they buzz and walk in. And he would use that as a correctional procedure to keep our chops from being too flabby. So that's he told me mouthpiece buzzing is a waste of time. That's nothing against you guys. I know you all love it, and that's all right. But I haven't buzzed my mouthpiece since 1978, and I don't miss it, So there you go. Did I say enough?
Yeah. Any of you guys want to add anything, or I'll move on to another question. The other thing I was thinking about that I think is kind of different, question, is if I look at, I think there's like 2 different ways that people think about technique in music or sound, and maybe I'm wrong in the way I'm asking the question, but if I look at like Adams, I'll start with Jim Stokes, but if I look at like Bill Adams and Arnold Jacobs, I think they have the approach that the first thing is to get the concept of sound in your head, and that the technique is going to fall into place. And then if I were to look at like Claude Gordon, where the technique in getting those things to work is kind of the primary thing, and then the sound will fall into place because the technique's working. I don't know what all 4 of you think about that, but I'd be kind of curious to see how you would answer that and the way you would explain it kind of from your point of view. Because I know my experience when I started with Claude, I was messed up and I needed someone to tell me to fix certain things. Otherwise, there was no hope to sound good, if that makes sense. So let me ask Jim Stokes first, and then I'll go to Roy, and then I'll go to the other ones.
Well, Mr. Adam used to talk about the percentage of how you think about when you play the trumpet. He changed this slightly over the years. I was in the school at the time when it was 99% sound and 1% technique when you're playing the trumpet. So when you're performing. So what your mind is in the sound. Of course, we all think about technique. He was talking about the things that we might have to just get ourselves back in gear. We have to make sure that if there's something a little bit wrong, we're focusing on that to make sure it lines up right. So we put it back into that 99%. We're not thinking about it, we're performing. And to add to that, the overall thing that I heard time after time, from the time I was 18 until, well, he'll be 95 in October. So he tells me this every time. So he wants to basically set us free, set the sound free, the freedom in the sound, freedom in the breath. So I mean, that's everybody's goal, is to play effortlessly. You were talking about tension, or what did you say a minute ago? What came through my mind was we have to play firm but loose, in that respect. So that's a lot of information that we heard a lot of times, and we also heard it through the sound. But I think that's pretty much what you were talking about,
Yeah.
right?
And then I'll have Roy answer that question.
Can you repeat the question?
Whether you think of sound as being the primary thing that kind of determines technique to fall into place, or whether you look at technique as the primary thing that kind of should be focused on, and then the sound is a byproduct of the correct technique. Like which one would you put as the primary thing you're looking at? I mean, I know they're both important. I'm not saying that, because I don't think anyone would say technique is the only thing that matters. Who cares what you sound like, you know, because we're all here to make music, you know?
Yeah. I think that, I don't know if I can, if I'm saying or parroting what my teacher would have said, because he didn't say a lot of words some days, you know. He was pretty economical with his language. But I think that that a good sound comes from an idea that you have in your head, and we as teachers and our teachers gave us an excellent model to listen to and to draw from for getting a good sound. Most of us went to our teachers, Mr. Stamp, and in my case, because we had production problems. He never, after I was 16 years old, he never gave me an assignment. And one day I said, "Hey, how come you don't ever give me an assignment?" He said, "Well, when you quit bringing in more than I can give you in an hour of things you want to work on, I'll give you assignments." So I wasn't the kind of student that needed to be told what to do every week. I was looking for things that I was having trouble with and bringing them in right and left, and he had his hands full trying to help me every week, and that was kind of our relationship. I think that good technique and good sound is a byproduct of correct production. I think there are more and less successful ways of producing. I was blessed with a teacher that had strong beliefs about correct production, and since consistency was one of the things that was hard for me to acquire as a young professional aspirant, I was getting what I needed from Mr. Stamp. Is that?
Yeah, that's great. I'm gonna now next will be Bob.
Well, as far as working with Claude, he always he was a real technician. He wanted you to have all the flexibility and tools of the trade in your bag of tricks, so when you could walk in and do anything from different articulation models, this and that. And he always said, you want to get a good tone, but never hammer down more than 85% of your potential, because he doesn't want you to be blatty or blasty. You want to be playing as under control. And so basically, we never really discussed sound, because he seemed to be contented with what was coming up or coming out of me, and so he mainly worked on the variable things, on his approach to playing trumpet in all assets, but you know, he didn't want you to overblow either, and so that's kind of, you know, the one thing that we did discuss, and that I almost had to learn on my own, was how to play soft, because he always wanted you to take a big breath and keep that support happening to build that, but to play soft is almost more critical than to play loud. So that was something. Anyway.
Cool. I'll go to Rich.
Could you repeat the question again?
Okay. Whether sound is primary or secondary to technique.
Okay, that's right. You know, what Jim was saying about Mr. Adam wanting to set people free, I think that probably all our teachers had that in common, so I think that's cool to hear the way he said that. Doc Reinhardt told me that, and in fact, it's what Roy was saying, that the sound is in our head. My sound comes from my conception of what a good trumpet sounds like. The more great trumpet players I listen to, the more my conception, you know, evolves and arrives at the way I think a trumpet should sound. And Doc Reinhardt also talked about the texture of our sound. He said everybody's sound has their own, it's like your fingerprint. The texture of your sound is different. Clark Terry could walk in and play every single person's horn in this room, and he would always sound like Clark Terry. You know what I mean? The same goes for any of us. We all just, we have that sound concept. No matter what horn we play, no matter what equipment we play, our conception is going to eventually get us sounding the way we want to sound, which is why it's crazy for some of us who have a big dark conception to play certain equipment that just makes that harder, because we're going to kill ourselves trying to get to the sound that we want, whereas other kinds of equipment could have made that easier all along. And if like, I like a nice rich sound. If I was to play what's a ridiculous shallow mouthpiece? I don't even know. Just name one. What's a stupid shallow?
A Cat Anderson special.
Okay, so if I was to play one of those, it might take me 5 years, but eventually I would get the sound that I go for, you know, if I don't die in the process. So, you know, the equipment does have something to do with it, but what it really has to do with it is, does it get in our way or not? And then the last thing I wanted to say, I forget, somebody triggered this thing, is Doc used to talk about there's a lot of situations, symphonic players may not always get this, or may get this less often than commercial players, but I've been in so many situations where I can't even hear myself. And if I were to rely on going for the sound, I would be in big trouble, man, because I can't hear myself. He wanted us to rely on feel. He wanted us to get feel conscious, because he said when it feels right, you know it sounds right. So, you know, good grief, man. I can't think of, like playing in a salsa band or something. You know, they got the bass so loud, the vocals are so loud. You're standing next to the timbales and it's like you're dying. And then you got this trombone player who, like, you know, makes you sound puny.
We always sound like whiners because we're always, if we can't hear ourselves, we're like, where's the monitor? Can you adjust my sound? And, you know.
But
So
see, that's what it's about, man. You gotta go for the right feel. I've started wearing earplugs ever since I had Bell's palsy. Coming back from Bell's palsy, it really hurt to sit in a band. So I've been wearing earplugs for, I guess, a little over 3 years now. But so I don't need to know what I sound like. When it feels right, I know I sound right. So anyway, I probably talked too long. Sorry.
No, that's great. And that was kind of what I was getting at with the question too, like feel. I should have also thrown in the thing of feel.
I threw it in for you.
Yeah, that was good. And well, the next question I'll throw out, it kind of relates to that. Claude was a big proponent of talking about the tongue and specifically tongue level and using vowel sounds off for low notes, E for high notes, and different variations on that. Like I know Bob talked about, like, you know, as you go up higher, it might even be more to him, more it feels like tick or teeth or however you might describe that. How would each of you describe that? I'm gonna start with Rich first, and then work back up the line to Roy. So, your Reinhardt's thoughts on tongue level and the use of vowels, and whether, like I'd say with Claude Gordon, he'd say that every note has a specific tongue level, and that you can't play without using tongue level. I know that some of you might disagree with that, so start with Rich.
Well, yeah, Doc Reinhardt agreed with the whole syllables, you know, O, A, E,
Right.
and it was about controlling the speed of your airstream. There's certain guys who they have a real kind of a short tongue and it's real wide, and they play with their tongues way up in their mouth, and they have barely any room for the air to get by. These guys can play high real easy because they're compressing their air column. It's a smaller air column, easier to make the air fast. If you try to play, do you know Tom DeLibero?
Yes.
Yeah, now he claims he doesn't use tongue syllables. I would like to see him play.
Impossible.
I
I
would
did
like
2
to
albums with him.
Oh,
I know how he plays.
I would like to watch him play. I would like to watch him play through a fluoroscope or something, because man, whew. But anyway.
He's a bad boy.
Whew, man, he's ridiculous. Yeah, I've known him for, I don't know, 30 years. Yeah, he's awesome.
Yeah.
But anyway, some guys claim that they do such and such, and so forth, and if you watch them play through a fluoroscope, you might find out differently. And I think we probably all use a certain tongue arch to help speed the air up. So that's pretty much all I'll say on that.
Bob?
Well, being a Claude Gordon student and others, I think we've hit the common denominator here with all it's impossible not to use syllables for range differentiation. In Claude's books and everyone that I've spoken with, and I know a number of guys that work with Mr. Adam, Charlie Davis, Jerry Haig, Larry Hall. They're all out of Indiana, and they're all fine players. And it's got to be a common denominator. There's just no way if you were saying taw, you're going to play a high C. There's just no way, because the airstream governs the pitch, up and down. It's a no-brainer.
Yeah.
Okay, we'll have Jim.
I always look at it this way. I asked Mr. Adam those kind of questions. He actually didn't want to talk to me much about it, because that was not his way of conveying the information, was through the sound. So he would change his sound. Maybe he's changing what we're talking about, all right? But he wouldn't talk about those things. He wanted me to listen to that and imitate that. So I think that all of these guys had a lot of information in their head. You know, for me, if you read Arnold Jacobs' book, the guy who wrote that was, you know, in his interviews of Arnold Jacobs, talked about the pivot system, and he talked about the different books and how much information that you're really required to have. I mean, Arnold Jacobs knew a lot of stuff. So when I asked Mr. Adam that stuff, he had that knowledge, but he wouldn't say that. So was the only syllable that I learned. And that was
In other words, if you want to play a third space C and you want to go play an octave higher, you're going to use ah.
That's what he said.
May the force be with you.
So anyway, but I would say that was him trying to get people to stay relaxed.
Mm-hmm.
That was his way of conveying that. And you have to look at this. This was only me.
Mm-hmm.
I'm only giving you this information through the way he taught me. So in the my double high C does not exist. All right, I'll be the first one to tell you that. However, if Fred can be attest to this, evenness in the sound that we have because of the way that we go after it, and you hear that in Jerry's and especially Larry's. I love Larry's playing, Larry Hall playing. But the evenness in those guys' sound is just remarkable. And they were all taught the same thing, not to think about the changing the vowel, and of which I would say it probably does. It must.
It has to.
But our concentration is in that relaxed top.
Okay.
Right?
Cool.
I didn't really admit it, but I
Carefully guarded Tracy.
Yeah. Nice tap dance. Okay.
What do you have to say, Roy?
I'm just so interested by what I've heard, because my teacher admired every one of these teachers that these other guys studied with. He gave me a copy of the Reinhardt book and said, "Read this. You'll find this interesting." And I still have my copy of the Reinhardt book. And like I said, he very much admired Adam, and he said something about Claude one time. He said, "Man," he said, "if all of us could get our students motivated the way Claude can do, we'd all have much better students." He admired him very much. So it's great to hear the progeny of these great teachers talk about anything, you know. Kind of like Rich said about Reinhardt, Jimmy really, when I pin him down and say, "What about tongue position?" We said, well, he used to say O, ah, and E. And another thing he used to say, which I didn't understand the wisdom of when I was a younger guy, but I really get it now. He used to say, "Don't be afraid to use the E vowel in the middle register." And if you look at music that has big intervals going in and out of the middle register, the tongue can never be rigid in the mouth. Clark said so. And I think most people that know anything would teach that way. The tongue should never be rigid in the mouth. And it will need to go to the E vowel to accelerate the air at certain times. And though the goal is to forget about all this and just play the music that's in front of us, and to read the lines and to play the lines that are in our head. If we have trouble executing those lines, sometimes knowing where the tongue is can really help you. Another thing that Jimmy Stamp used to say was, if you're sticking on your intervals, pay attention to where's the tip of the tongue. Sometimes the tip of the tongue drifts up in between the teeth, the upper and the lower teeth. Then you've got a disturbance right at the wrong place that can mess everything up. Plus, you see the tongue flattened out. So the tip of the tongue resting lightly behind the lower teeth in a slurring position allows for all this movement that the tongue can do where it's appropriate musically. And I teach that the trumpet's a triangle. I tell my students the trumpet's a triangle. The O vowel is like maybe low F sharp to maybe low A. The A vowel is most of the trumpet until, and my particular in the position that I play in, my sound breaks it. I have to be at the E vowel at high C, high D, going from high C to high D. I break to an E vowel. There's just no other way for me to do it cleanly and with a good quality result. And then I'm in a higher position all the way up to wherever I can't play anymore. That kind of answer your question?
Yeah, that's great. Yeah, Rich is going to have her own thing.
Doc Reinhardt always talked about, or he also talked about if you're, like let's say you're slurring past several partials, he would say insert like a W, like we, a little bit of a W in there, and that'll help you skip those partials. You won't bump into them. And also, if you're like already on a high C and you want to go up to a G, if you're already thinking E, you can't go E if you're already on E. So he would say you sort of have to think, once you're there, then then that's now you're now you got to go E a little higher. So yeah, it's kind of weird, man. But the W thing definitely helps you skip those unwanted partials in the middle.
Hold on a second. Apple TV disconnected. Is it back?
Did we lose him?
Okay. Yeah, I reconnected it. Okay.
Can I add one?
Yeah, Jim wants to add something.
I think to add what I was trying to say too, and sometimes you forget it when you get very analytical about the way that you think about how we learn these things. The thing that was often communicated to me was these things are as a result. Your tongue goes in a particular position, not necessarily by feel, but as a result of the sound that you're making, as a result of the sound. So it was always, for Adam, it was always going back to the common denominator or the majority, that 99%, which is the sound that you're going after. And as a result, the tongue would do something. You react one way or the other. So that's the way that I was taught.
I think the syllables are for like a general area of the scale range, and that your body will take over what it naturally wants to do anyway, like someone said recently. Philippe said that today in his exhortation, and I agree to that. And in the extreme range, when you're creating the velocity, as I spoke earlier today, that you get to a point with the E, and then it has to shift up one more gear to tish, and that gets you your extreme range, because now you close down your venturi, and your velocity is a lot stronger without costing you your chops.
When you were taking from Claude, did he ever stamp things on your book that would say "watch the tongue"?
No.
No.
No. Chest up, big breath.
Okay, we had this.
Good stuff.
Like when I was taking
The
from
fingers
him,
high.
he had this stamp that he would put on there later that said "watch the tongue," and I think he was kind of getting at that idea is that you're trying to learn from it.
But I would rather not have students kind of thinking about where's my tongue, and just let it happen.
Yeah.
But if you're aware of the four syllables, ta, tu, ti, tish, and Maggio was the one that pointed that out, and that gives you your another fifth.
Mm-hmm.
Not necessarily liquid.
The other thing that I thought was kind of interesting, I don't know the answer to this, but I know you mentioned when you were taking from Stamp that maybe there wasn't an assignment, but I'm sure there had to be something where it was written down, because he had exercises that we know of, like is the stamped exercises. So what kinds of things did he write down in lessons, or did he create exercises, handwritten exercises, and what was that like, coming from your point of view, Roy?
Well, I didn't mean to say I didn't really have any assignments. I mean, we did his scale patterns, and with him at the keyboard and he at the mouthpiece every single week, and then we did his warm up because it was a doorway into gaining some efficiency and correct production in the learning process for me. I think early on he was doing a lot with bending notes, and I got worse every week behind those ideas. And I think we're having trouble.
Is the connection okay?
Yeah, over here it is.
Okay. Yeah.
Okay. I think I had trouble because I would like let the air column sag as I would bend the notes and just let it fall into a half tone lower or something like that. And of course, then everything would just open up too much, and I would get worse instead of better. Finally, he said, you're not good enough to do this yet. Let's go back to da 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 dee da da, and until I was a lot better player, we kept it on that basis. So.
Now, what method books did you use, or did he talk about specific method books or assign anything out of different things?
Clark Technical Studies, Schlossberg. I think he thought the Arden book was fairly boring. He only did certain things out of Arden, but we did a lot of St. Jacome. We used the Schubruk books, Graded Lip and Tongue Trainers, they were called at that time. Now they're published in 2 volumes by Carl Fisher. They were 6 pamphlets at the time, and their production studies. Charlier, Brand Orchestral Studies, Bousquet, a typical litany of books.
Cool. With the lessons that you took with Mr. Adam, what was written down? Was it written down assignments? How specific was it? And what kinds of handwritten material and other method books did you use in your lessons?
Exactly what Roy, every single thing except for the Schubert books. I didn't see those. And we spent a lot of time in Charlier. It was all about everybody. I don't know if everybody is familiar with routine, Adam's routine. Okay, the one that's written down that I actually sent you is manuscript. What we used. Charlie was one of the first ones that he developed that at that time. Don't tell Charlie I said that, because that might be exactly right, and we'd have to fight about it next time.
I know nothing. Hello, Charlie.
Anyway, it's basically, it starts with long tones. It starts with a pipe, and then it goes to long tones, which are always expanding. They start at G and they go all the way down to low G, or you start on C and you expand out from that. You go low and then high, each out a half step. And then the next thing was Clark 1, and we did the same thing. You start on number 13 and you expand all the way out to the lowest one and all the way out to the highest one, past that and beyond, depending on where you are in your playing. He used to go by, I think this is a Maggio thing. If it doesn't go well, then you go on to if it goes well, you go on to the next one. If it doesn't go well, you wait for 90 seconds.
Huh.
Is that a Maggio thing? I don't know, or is that a stamp thing? I don't know where he got that.
I don't know.
He would make me sit there and look at my clock for 90 seconds, and then he'd say, okay, let's do the next one. So he'd always make us do that. And if it went well, we'd go on to the next one. So that was the process. And then he wrote a thing called Expanding Scales. I think the history for that was in school, and you have to realize that he was in an academic environment, so they also had scale requirements. So he wrote Expanding Scales, which also worked with the major scale requirements, except for one of them, which is a little funky, but the rest of them are based on major scales. And it goes from the key of G all the way out to F sharp, for 3 octaves, so it can also be used as an expanding in the biggest sense. It's a 5th or a 6th G in the key of G to, if you go all the way down to low F sharp, all the way up to high F sharp, was the 3 octaves, and that's where he stopped, but most folks would take it to G and to A flat and to A and keep doing the 3 octave scale. And then after that, it was 13, 14, 15, I think he skipped 16, and he did 17 in Schlossberg, and then there was 95, a friend of mine, 32. Number 32 or 31 in the Schlossberg was another one that they did, da 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 da, and that was another thing for, he thought of that as a range or intervals, not necessarily as a flexibility study. So he was trying to get us to hear the sound and to play those things freely. And as we grew, the upper register worked in a much better manner with the right sound. That was his goal. And then 95 was another expanding thing. It always kind of starts in the middle and works its way out. So that's an over explanation of the Schlossberg, and it wasn't written. He gives credit on every one of them to Schlossberg, but he doctored it a little bit. It starts lower. It always goes with his idea of from low to high in every instance. So
Bob will be next.
Well, as far as studying with Claude, of course he had a systematic approach. So what we would do is I went through that book, and then he would write variations on what he wanted to elaborate. Sometimes he would have you add a second octave immediately and expand that way, depending on what the exercise was. And of course, most of you know the books that he was interested in using. The Clark's Technical and Characteristics, the Arbin, St. Jacome, the Colon Flexibilities, or there was
Aaron Harris?
Yeah, Aaron Harris, just a number of different etude books and whatnot. So it was, we're again getting in common territory here, where the teachers, focused on pretty much the same books as far as study. I can't really, I know he wrote stuff out for me each week, other than what was already in print.
Now, the routine, was it assigned so that it was supposed to be played in a particular order, in a certain way? And
Well, I mean, he had his models. They were, the single tongue, then you K-tongue it, and then you double tongue it, and then you slur 2, slur 4, slur all, slur 2, tongue 2, slur 2, tongue 1, slur 2, tongue 1. I mean, there was 7 different models that he had, so he figured if there's any way that a composer can write this, you're going to be able to play it. And that really helped get a leg up on sight reading, because there's been many musicians have issues with sight reading because they're not focused on articulation. And that's pretty much it.
Rich, next.
Oh, let's see. Doc did use the Arbin's book, and he liked the Brandt 34 orchestral studies. he had a standing bet with all of his students that he called number 6 in Brandt the stake routine, and he said if they could play that at their 8th note. So he said every 8th note. So in other words, an 8th note equals 60. So bum 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 bum. He said if you could play every single note all the way through with a perfect tone, never chip any notes, he would go out. He would take you out and buy you the biggest steak in Philadelphia. He said he never had to buy a single steak. But he liked he liked number 26 for double tonguing. And he liked number 28 for triple tonguing. I'm probably singing these like a jazzer. I don't care because I am a jazzer. And
I knew I liked you.
And let's see, number 31 was for technique. He had various Arbin stuff he would have you do. He told me that they approached him to revise the Arbin's book, and I guess Claude ended up doing it. And he said, you know what? He said, I didn't want my name associated with that book, and I thought that was kind of stupid. And he said, in my opinion, that whole book should have been written up at least a major third. He said, 'cause the whole book, because the whole book basically aims you toward a high C. And he said, it wasn't too much, after, in the 30s, high C wasn't enough, man. You had to have more. And so many guys, he called them E-flat trumpet players, guys who, spent a lot of time in the low register and never really spent any time in the high register, and they could get up to a high E-flat. And he said, but they couldn't play a high E if you held a gun to their head. Well, he was talking about me. That was me. And so I couldn't transpose at the time. I went out and bought a D trumpet, and I started practicing. Actually, I practiced Brandt and, which was hard, and Arbin on a D trumpet. And sure enough, man, it really helped my chops. But as far as he wrote out a ton of stuff. He had all these handouts. He had a professor or somebody told him to put everything on different colored sheets. So he had like every imaginable color that the print shop had of handouts that he would give you. One of his, he had studied at Curtis, and he had this teacher, Madame Lange Miguel or something like that, who gave him an interval study that he gave to all his students. And what it was, and he would use 12 articulations. Nana, nana, boo boo. Anyway.
Can I write that down?
Yeah, he had his 12 standard articulations, but so he would have you, half step, ba 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 da bo da bo da ba da ba da bo da bo, and then you take that, starting on a G, go up, and then you come back down, half steps, and then you go ba 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 bo ba bo ba 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 ba, whole steps, and you take that up, come back down, and then da 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 bo da bo da 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 da. So you would hear what each interval sounded like up and down, and then you would take that up and down, and then major third bum ba bum ba bum bum ba bum ba da 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 bo da bo da ba da ba da bo da bo, and the more da ba da ba da ba da ba da ba da ba, because an interval sounds different up than it sounds down, and he would have you do those through the whole range of the horn. And the cool thing about that was he told me that was the best ear training exercise that I could play, because after you've done those for a long time, no matter what note you're on, every interval is like your friend. You spent so much time with it, and you can hear it before you play it, and down as well as up. Most of us can hear intervals great up, but we have trouble hearing intervals down, like a minor six down, bum 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 bum. You know what I mean? Everybody knows my Bonnie lies over. We all know him up, but learning him down. So he was big on. He would zero in on stuff that was hard, and he would make just dwell on it. Beat you up with stuff that was hard, so that when you went out and played music, it was, this is easy. So that's enough out of me.
Okay. Now I'd like to open it up for questions from people in the audience. So, when you walk up, you can state your name, where you're from, and ask your question.
All right, Ralph Marks, Reading, Pennsylvania, and wanted to ask Roy a question. We've heard a lot from these fellows today, but just those of us who are comeback players, we're looking for stuff that's going to help us all the time. And I read something in the International Trumpet Guild with Mr. Tedesco, Los Angeles player, and it said that he was ready to quit, give up his trumpet, and then Malcolm McNabb got a hold of him and said, come on over to my house and I'll help you. And what he did basically was he did the Roy Stamp stuff. So nobody told me I couldn't do this, so I called Tedesco on the phone and had an hour conversation with him, and he told me what to do with that stamp exercises. And so I've been doing that, but he said, be careful that you don't do them wrong, because he said, I hear guys all the time playing that first note as an eighth note instead of a quarter note. Make sure you play them and you take your time. I just wanted to ask Roy a little bit. I've been doing them for about 6 months. They seem to have opened up my tone quite a bit, but I think my question to you is, what am I really looking for in doing those? And, is there any help on maybe making sure we're doing them correctly? Okay?
Yeah. I would use a metronome, and I'd put the metronome on 8 notes. So whatever speed you decide to do the exercise, do it in 8 notes, Mr. Stamp was adamant that that you make square corners with your intervals, and this eliminates the the um, the bad habit that some of us get into of lifting lifting an interval with the lip, or letting the airspeed fall off and then dragging the note onto the next interval. So he was big on square corners. He even used a little lightning bolt up and down to indicate to blow all the way to the end of that note before you break and go to the low one, or all the way to the note before you break and go to the upper one. And doing this, he used to say, seems to keep the notes in their proper place. Does that answer the question?
So I believe it answers the question. Anyone else like to ask a question? I don't know if you guys know each other.
Peter Voisin, Hendersonville, North Carolina. I used to go to Oberlin at one time. Anyway, my question is to all four of you. If you can think back into all of the students that really you helped quite a bit, you know, maybe overcome something that maybe both of you weren't sure would have been able to be solved, and what the situation was, and if you can remember, what was it? What was it? The sound? Was it the technique? Was it the business? I'm thinking that all of you have such varied situations that it would give us a glimpse sort of on all of the different ways that as teachers, you know, as people who are making a difference with their students, I would be very interested in any of your history there.
Okay. Let me start with Roy first, and then we'll go down the line of the other guys.
When I think of the most typical problem that I see in my studio day to day, week to week, and whenever I teach a student from outside my studio that's having problems with one thing or another, the first thing I try to do is establish the correct lip tension. And I have a little handout that I give to my students that I cannot prove scientifically, so don't even ask me to try. But what it is, and it's based on the idea that I think I'm a pretty good model for this myself, because I'm the only one I can depend on to prove this to. But I start with like a low C on the mouthpiece, and I'll pull the mouthpiece off and observe where the buzz is. In my case, if I start on a low C, a pedal C comes out. D, a pedal C comes out. And it'll be 4, 5, 6, 7 notes dramatically before a higher note comes out after I've pulled the mouthpiece off. And in students that are having trouble with range, trouble with clean intervals, etc., the first thing I usually see that needs work is the idea that their state of lip tension is way too high when they're playing their mouthpiece or playing their horn. Their opinion of where their body needs to be to play a given note is way too high strung, from the support all the way to the lips. And so I try to work them on this little sheet that I have, and they're usually astonished that when they get into the upper middle register after having done this drill, that they've got all kinds of room that they can still draw on to go higher. And I would say that that's the most common problem that I see with a player that wants help that walks through the door.
Cool. Let me go on to Jim Stokes.
I'd say three things. Like the same experience that I had when I start kids at 18 years old. They come to college and they want to be trumpet players or music educators. The common denominator there is that they're required to play the trumpet well, no matter whether they're performance major or whether they're an ed major. I noticed the most common thing is sometimes they come with a marketable sound. I have to understand that everybody's going to be different, yet they still have to make a good, consistent sound, and that not all of them understand that. They really don't understand how to sustain that long term. I mean, over a long period of time, and how to maintain that. The second thing is that what I've noticed about students in that regard is that they have no idea the kind of hours that you have to put in to play the trumpet well. And I always make the comparison of my upbringing. There was no computer in my life. There was no electronics. So that's what I did. I love those stories about Arturo Sandoval in Cuba. They didn't have anything. All they did was practice and play their instrument. So then you flash ahead 25 or 30 years to where I'm teaching them, and there's so much competing for their time. There are a lot of fine trumpet players, but they still have to spend a lot of time with that and the practicing, and they have to learn how to do it. Those are the biggest general problems that I see. And then as a teacher, and who is also a performer, I have to look them in the eye, and also I have to kind of check my own attitude at the door when I go in that I have to be very patient with these kids. Some of them get it right away, and others don't. Some never get it. Most of them do. But the ones that really get it, they pick it up, and you're always working and helping them understand those things quickly. Others really take a long time to develop those kinds of things. So patience, I think, I'm not saying that's their problem. Patience should be part of their issue too. They have to be patient with themselves, not judge themselves, and take one day at a time. And never comparing themselves to the next guy, so that they can get to where they're going at their own pace. I try to get them to think that way, so their only goal is to beat the next person. Whereas a little bit of competition didn't hurt anybody. However, in the learning process, you really have to concentrate on what you do well and go at your pace, which is different than the others. That's where the patience comes in for the teacher.
Well, as I mentioned earlier today in our little chit chat, I never really had any issues myself that I had to correct or find reasoning. So when I started teaching kids, I had to figure out what they were doing wrong so I could correct them. And as I told you earlier today, I had this one boy that sounded like a kazoo, and I couldn't figure out how he was getting that sound out of his horn, when in fact I finally, just by imitating and trying different things, I realized that he had his teeth closed when he was playing, cutting off his airstream, and therefore it sounded like I said, a kazoo. And it finally dawned on me, and I was able to correct it. But a lot of times, the corrections aren't that simple. It takes a long time. I had one boy that would take a big breath, but his shoulders would come up, and so he'd sound like this. And I said, well, how can you possibly project through your instrument if you're strangling yourself? I said, if you think of yourself, if you take a big breath and think of calling a friend across the football field, you wouldn't go, hey! You'd go, hey! That's the difference. So you have, and it took doing that in his left ear before it got through to him. Of course, he doesn't hear well anymore, but.
What did you say?
Yeah. So those are the kind of issues I just had to figure on how are they doing this wrong so we could make it right. But I had other issues with guys and gals even with chop problems because they were overlapping. Everyone is so different that you just have to take them one at a time and work with them and hopefully find the answers.
What do you have to say, Rich?
I on the other hand did everything wrong, so I've probably been there no matter what you do wrong. But I went to North Texas in the late 70s, and I thought I was going to go in and get to study with John Haney, and I found out that not only did no freshmen or sophomores or juniors or probably even seniors study with him, it's like only the grad students study with him, and it was like by audition only, you know. So I'm not bashing anybody, you know. John Haney's a great teacher, but you know, guys who came out of North Texas, great players, were not necessarily products of John Haney, you know. And Reinhardt told me the same thing. He studied with Schlossberg, and he said he listed the students who went in on a typical day ahead of him, and he said, and then, you know, somehow he got lessons with Schlossberg, and he said, you know, Schlossberg, for the most part, never turned out a bad student because he didn't take a bad student. So a lot of teachers, oh, hey, Peter, yeah, it's good to see you, man. A lot of these teachers, you know, they're not the ones who make the students good. You know, it's like in these graduate programs, you know, the elite get to study with the big shot teacher. So Reinhardt, on the other hand, he was known as being like a troubleshooter guy. A lot of celebrity players, and I've since found out who a lot of them were, that we all know who they are, went to him when they were in trouble, you know, like the late night lessons, and they would go to see him, and he would straighten them out. And but you were talking about, I guess you were asking about what we deal with seeing students. I kind of have three different kinds of students. I teach in 3 colleges. I'm an adjunct. I'm not a big shot. You know, I'm a little shot, even though I'm a big guy. But most of those guys, they don't come to me. You know, I mean, they're required to take lessons. You know, they don't care. They just every once in a while I'll get a really dedicated student, and it's gratifying. But in the colleges that I teach at, you know, they didn't go to that college to study with me. That's for sure. You know, I just happen to be the guy. So I meet them where they are, and I try to give them materials that are going to challenge them, and you know, make them realize. You know, I kind of do the same thing. I find their weaknesses. I had one student, it took me like 2 semesters to find out, because this guy was good, you know, to find out what his weaknesses were. Once I finally found it, oh boy, man, you know, I let him have it. But it was great, you know, because he's a really good player now. His weakness was not being able to play everything in every key. Yes. So ever since then, all my books have everything in every key. I don't know if you've noticed that, yeah. Anyway, and you know what? The stuff that I've written, it has been to address the needs of a student. I've never sat down and said, I'm going to write a book. Yeah, it's always a collection of stuff that I've been doing to take into students, and next thing it's like, whoa, I could turn this into a book. So, and then I have, every once in a while I have beginner students, and beginner students, you know, Roy was talking about you haven't taught beginners. You know, man, it's tough, because they don't know, and you were talking about the same thing. They just don't understand the amount of work that it really takes. So the beginners that I've taught have not really stayed with me very long, and that's not such a bad thing, you know. And then the other kinds of students that I really enjoy are guys who come to me from out of town, because they know that I've, you know, been like the most screwed up player ever, and you know, now I can play. You know, I play with Maynard and stuff like that, so they think I must know what I'm doing, and they'll come to. I mean, I've had guys from California, Texas. I mean, you know, all over the place come to see me, and I'll spend the whole day with them, and that's those are my favorite kinds of students to teach, because they're dying to find out what they're doing wrong. They don't come to me to impress me. They come to me, you know, because they want help, and they will do what I suggest. I had one guy come to me. This guy, he practiced, man, I can't remember what his job was, but he would go home and he would just practice all day, and every note that he played had this in front of it. You know, every note that he tongued, you could hear that sound in front of it. So I knew he was just slapping that cup with his tongue. So we had to get his tongue out of there. So I said, all right, I'm gonna make you miserable. I said, for the next month, I just want you to play all breath attacks. Don't use your tongue for anything. And walk around when you're not playing and say D D D D D D D D D D D D D. So he did that. And then he came back after a month, and we had him play, and his sound was great, but he would try to tongue, and it was still, you know. And so I said, all right, you know what? You've earned another month of, you know, of no tongue purgatory, and he did it. And when he came back, we tried it again, and you know, the D thing finally caught on. And he called me about a year later. He moved after that, and I didn't see him for a long time. But he called me a year later, just thrilled to death, man, because he was playing in a big band and he was playing lead. I mean, he couldn't get out of the staff before. So it is really gratifying to, you know, figure out what a guy's problem is and help set him on the right path. And then, you know, they give me all the credit. No, man, he's the one that did all the work. You know, maybe I was able to spot it because it's something I had done. But, you know, these guys I love those guys. They come to me and they're willing to work hard. They make it all worthwhile.
Okay, anyone else have a question? Okay.
I've got one last quick story as far as students. I had this young student. He was coming along really well, and he came in one week, and it sounded like he hadn't touched his horn in a week. And I said, "What's going on? I mean, you were doing so well last week." And he says, "Well, I was kind of busy this week." I said, "Really? What were you doing?" He goes, "Well, I was designing this rocket, and I wanted to see if I could to develop the trajectory into my friend's backyard about 8 blocks away from me, and I needed to coincide with the propulsion qualities." And I'm going, "What? What do you want to play trumpet for?" And this kid was a genius. But I mean, he couldn't stay focused. And he was doing terrible in school because he was bored, and yet when he practiced, he sounded great. But he says, I had to see how much fuel I needed to land the trajectory 8 blocks from here. And I said, "Well, how'd it go?" He says, "I hit the yard." So there you go.
Good.
Jeez.
Okay, I think we're going to stop here. Any last comments that you want to make, Roy?
No, I just how grateful I feel to be included in this fine bunch. You've done a great job to put this together, Jeff. And I feel like I've had an hour and a half trumpet lesson myself, and it's been a fantastic experience. Thanks.
Cool. Well, I enjoyed having you be part of it, and I think both my wife and I were, when we saw you, I think at ITG in 2006, she still remembers how nice and friendly you were, and when we met you back then. So it's always good to see you again. So
Thank you.
have a good rest of your vacation, and I too enjoyed all this. I don't know if anyone else has anything to say.
Roy, we'll see you again in 20 years.
Okay, Bob.
Oh, yeah.
Great to see you.
Okay,
I agree with everything you said, Roy. I agree.
Thanks a lot, Roy.
Thank you.
Thank you, Jeff.
Thank you.